Hi, I'm Hope Telefero, a student with the Indie Birth Midwifery School, and over the last few weeks we've been studying the anatomy and physiology of labor and birth. I'm also an experienced doula, so I've been observing the natural process of birth for the last 5.5 moving towards 6 years, and I have seen some really amazing things, and I wanted to just give you kind of a crash course in what happens in normal natural labor. Labor begins with contractions. Sometimes it can begin with the water breaking, but most of the time it just begins with contractions and the water breaks later on in labor. And a good explanation of contractions is if we think about the whole uterus. At the bottom of the uterus, we have the cervix, which rests at the very top and back of the vagina. So the cervix, we talk a lot about dilation, but what's happening with dilation, we also have effacement. So we have the cervix is getting shorter and thinner, and as it gets thinner, it's also drawing out towards the sides. But it's not just this hole opening up to make space. What's happening is that all the tissue from the lower portion of the uterus is drawing out of the way and up towards the top of the uterus, which we call the fundus. So the tissues of the cervix and the lower uterine segment are getting thinner and drawing out to the sides and then being lifted up. And so all of the tissue of the uterus is beginning to sort of condense at the top, and we're getting thick fundus. The fundus is getting thicker and stronger as the rest of the uterus gets thinner and moves out of the way. The fundus is getting really strong so that when the time comes, it can push the baby down and out, as well as moving the cervix out of the way so that now the baby is free to move downward. The cardinal movements of birth are how we describe the movement of baby through the pelvis. When it comes to birth, we talk about the power, the passenger, and the passage. The power being the contractions, which come from that really strong fundus at the top of the uterus. And we have the passenger, who is the baby, and we have the passage, which is the vaginal canal or the birth canal, and the pelvis itself. So here's my handy dandy pelvis today. One of the things that I think is really interesting about the pelvis is that it doesn't actually sit straight like this in the body. It sits at a pretty forward angle compared to what you might imagine in your mind. So it sits really forward like this. This is the pubic bone here, which is very low. The opening to the vagina is not far back from the pubic bone. And then the sacrum back here, and the coccyx or tailbone, which is not it's not fused to the sacrum most of the time. It is movable. And then you have the iliac crests, and these can be felt through the front of the body. We think of those, the hip points on the front of the body. This is what you can feel those. And then these down here are the ischial tuberosities. And the tuberosities we sometimes call the sitting bones, and we can feel them through our backside. And when we sit, we often feel that those 2 points kind of create our seat on the floor. An additional landmark that's important to note is the ischial spines. And you see those, you can see them through here. The ischial spines, one here and one here, create an additional landmark and sort of obstacle for baby as baby moves down through the pelvis. We can think of baby moving through pelvis as a key fitting into a lock. It's not going to fit just any way you try it. If you put the key in upside down or if you put the key in sideways, it wouldn't quite fit. But if we work long enough and give enough time, then the key will find the way that it needs to fit through the pelvis. We have normal labor, which progresses in this normal pattern, which we call the cardinal movements of birth. But sometimes baby has to find a different way through the pelvis. And what's amazing is that baby tends to kind of work and take time, and your body is working and taking time to find the way that baby is going to fit through your particular pelvis. But I'm going to describe to you how most babies, a typical baby, fits through a typical pelvis. And it's kind of a spiraling motion. So baby's head comes down and is and the whole baby is sort of spinning as it comes down through the pelvis. And that spinning motion is helping to get baby through and past the different obstacles that they might come into contact with on their way out. So here's our pelvis. We've got uterine contractions happening. The fundus is getting thicker and stronger. The cervix has moved is moving out of the way, and baby is beginning to move down. The cervix does not have to fully move out of the way for baby to move down. Some of this even can happen before labor. So you have baby floating up above the pelvis at first. And one of the first thing that needs to happen is that the baby's chin must tuck to their chest, flexion. So chin tucks to chest as firmly as possible. Really well flexed is what we call it when the baby's chin is really nicely tucked to their chest. Flexion is the first cardinal movement of birth. That happens to allow the smallest diameter of baby's head to fit through the opening. So the longest diameter of baby's head is going to be from the chin to the back of the head here. And you can see that that angle is significantly longer than this angle from here, the soft spot, to the back of the head, the occiput. So what we want is for the occiput to go down into the pelvis first. The occiput is here, and then the top of the head is here. So the back of the head fits down first, and that ensures that the longest diameter of baby's head is pointed down, and the shortest diameter of baby's head is going to actually fit through the pelvis itself, through the brim. So once baby's head is well flexed, the back of the head will turn towards either the right hip or the left hip. So it's going to be transverse. The head is transverse. That means that the back of the head, the occiput, is towards one of the hips. So I'm holding right now the back of the head towards mom's left hip. So that position is left occiput transverse. And baby comes down, descent, which is the second cardinal movement of birth, which continues throughout the entire labor, so descent. And then once the widest part of baby's head has made it down into the brim, past this sacral prominence here, once the widest part of baby's head has made it down past the brim, we say that baby is engaged. And that's the third cardinal movement of birth, engagement. Again, flexion and engagement can both happen before labor even begins in earnest. So sometimes that's even 2 weeks before baby's born, maybe, that you have flexion and descent happening. Flexion, descent, and engagement. So once baby is clear of the brim of the pelvis, the next thing that has to happen is that baby needs to get past the ischial spines, that additional landmark and barrier that I mentioned before. From here, baby needs to turn the head in order to complete, in order to get past the ischial spine. So we're again trying to find the way that the head can create the smallest diameter in a tight space. So the head continues to turn here, bringing the back of the head more towards the front of the pelvis and turning the face more towards the sacrum. So you might go to left occiput anterior or a full-on occiput anterior position at this point. And baby, once they turn the head, this is called internal rotation, which is the fourth cardinal movement of birth. Once they make that rotation, they're able to begin their movement down. At the same time that rotation is happening with the head, there's also rotation happening in the shoulders to fit the shoulders down into the brim, and the shoulders engage then. The spine may also be extending, so baby's whole body, even the parts that we can't see in my particular model right now, are working to bring baby down and out. And once baby's head clears the ischial spine, we might actually begin crowning at this point. So we might begin to see the glimpses of baby's head at the introitus, at the opening. From here, baby extends the neck, extends the head. So the head has been well flexed this whole time, chin down to the chest, and now we get extension. So the chin lifts away from the chest, and as the chin lifts away from the chest, baby is extending the head out of mama's body. And so that's how baby clears the soft tissue of mama's pelvic floor by extension of the head. So at this point, baby is fully clear of the bony pelvis, and now by extension is fully clear of the soft tissue parts of the pelvis. But we have some more movements that still have to happen for baby to be fully born. So the head is born, but the rest of the body is still inside. So first of all, baby's going to turn his or her head to match up with anatomical neutral. So because the shoulders and the head fit at different angles, the shoulders may have been at a different angle than the head when the head was born. So the head extended, and you can sort of see that maybe the chin was looking to the left or the right of baby. And so then, once baby's head emerges, we get restitution, which is the sixth cardinal movement. And so restitution is just bringing the head back in line with the shoulders to anatomical neutral. And from there, we've got one more movement baby's going to make in order to be born. So baby's going to rotate the shoulders internally, which we see as an external rotation of the head. So we'll watch, and we might see that baby turns their head to look directly towards one of mama's thighs, so looking to the left or the right. So once again, the head is in the transverse position, and that's how what baby is doing to get the shoulders past the ischial spines. So the baby's turning the whole body, shoulders and head, bringing the shoulders past the ischial spines. And now baby's shoulders, one may be tucked right here behind the pubic bone, and then the other one is down here, hopefully clear of the coccyx at this point. And then we get the birth of the shoulders, first usually the posterior shoulder, and then the top anterior shoulder can kind of slide out as well. The rest of the body sort of spirals on out, sort of continuing that spiral motion, and it all sort of happens generally in one movement. Shoulders and the rest of the body comes out pretty quickly after that. Sometimes a little bit chunkier babies may take a little extra push or two around their middle if they're just really roly-poly, but most of the time they come pretty well out quickly once their shoulders are born. Through this whole process, as a midwife, we're observing closely just to see what's going on and make sure everything looks really good and that everybody feels comfortable and is safe. Most of this does not require really any intervention. Through the process of baby moving down and out, we're watching to see changes in the mother's demeanor. We're listening to hear what she says. Once the baby starts to really move firmly into the pelvis, mama typically knows that and has some responses to it. We can see it in her demeanor, and often she might say something like, "Oh, the baby is coming," or "I feel the need to push." All of these things start to clue us in that baby is getting closer and closer. We may also see the rectum and the pelvic floor sort of flatten out, so it gets flatter and smooth as opposed to the kind of curved and indented landscape that we usually see. So it all begins to flatten out as baby's head comes lower and lower and puts more pressure on the pelvic floor and the perineum. And then baby is coming down hopefully slow enough that they're giving all of these tissues time to stretch and gently move out of the way instead of being really harshly shoved out of the way by the baby's head, which could cause more damage to the pelvic floor. So there is a reason that it takes time. So we're observing all of that happening. Sometimes there's a purple line that you can see in the mother's butt crack, for lack of a better word. And that purple line is going to lengthen out and get a little taller and rise towards her sacrum as she gets towards full dilation and as her baby is getting closer to being born. So we're observing all of those things to help us know that labor is progressing and to help us know where the mother might be in her process. As baby's head emerges, we're watching just to see that baby looks content and peaceful. And then we might also watch to see if there's any reason to believe that the shoulders are stuck. I don't have all that information yet, but I know that we're observing baby's tone and color as they're being born. And we want to give plenty of time for the shoulders to be born on their own. So we're watching for baby to really try to make these moves by restitution and that external rotation to make the moves necessary to get the shoulders free of the ischial spines and then to get that posterior shoulder out and relax the anterior shoulder so that it can come through on its own without any need for assistance. So through the actual birth process, generally, moms and babies don't really need a whole lot of help. Once baby actually emerges, then we're just observing to see that everything went really well. I was at a birth the other day where something very unusual happened. The umbilical cord abrupted at the time of birth. So baby came out and the umbilical cord was really short. So as baby was born, the cord tore. And so baby started losing blood through her umbilical cord, and quick acting midwife was able to reach in, grab hold of that cord, and just pinch it off. A mama could also do that. It doesn't take any specific skill, just knowledge and fast acting hands. So the midwife saw it, she grabbed it, and everything was fine. It was not a big deal. If we don't catch that quickly, it could have been a big deal. So that is something that you might be just observing for at the time of birth, making sure everything looks good and goes smoothly and that anything that needs attention is attended to. You pay attention to mother's bleeding as well and just kind of observe that everything looks normal with that as we wait for the placenta to be born. Generally there is a gush of blood, a small gush of blood that lets us know that the placenta has released from the side of the uterus, and then the mama might feel some cramps, and then at that point she might feel ready to push her placenta out, which is usually still attached to the baby at this point. So she may be holding the baby while she pushes, or maybe she lays the baby down on the floor while she pushes to deliver her placenta. Some variations of normal that can occur. Sometimes baby's head, instead of coming in at occiput transverse, wants to come in with the occiput posterior. And that can create some different challenges for birth. But for the most part, it is just a variation of normal. And babies tend to know how they need to be born for whatever reason. So if mom's tissue, even in her abdomen or in her pelvic floor, is tight in some ways, baby may find that there are some barriers to entry into the pelvis, and that an occiput posterior position is what allows baby to get into position where they need to be. And so baby doesn't know that there's rules and doesn't know that anyone wants them to be born with their head in a specific position, and so they find the way that works, and they come in with their occiput more towards the posterior of the pelvis. And the first barrier that can create, if the occiput is directly OP, then it can be hard to get past that sacral prominence. But oftentimes baby's not fully OP, they're like left occiput posterior. And so that means that they generally have a wider arc. They have a bigger circle to make before they come down, so sometimes it just takes more time. And the back of the head can really create a lot of pressure against the sacrum here. And so as the back of the head presses on the sacrum, it can make this really uncomfortable for mama. But baby works their way down. Over time, they may make the full rotation, bringing the head fully into a transverse position to be born, or they may stay posterior for a longer period of time persistently throughout the labor. One of the issues that can come up with a posterior baby is that it can be hard to get the chin flexed. So often a posterior baby is often not well flexed, and a head not being well flexed is another variation of normal that we have to deal with sometimes. So when the head is well flexed, as I talked about before, we get the smallest diameter of the head coming down into the pelvis, and the longest diameter of the head is dropping down, so we don't have to, that long diameter doesn't have to navigate the shape of the birth canal. However, if for some reason the head is deflexed, we get maybe a partially deflexed head, and we've already widened our diameter significantly. The head could be fully deflexed in a military position, and then we get a much wider shape here, from the forehead to the top of the occiput here. And that is a really challenging position because baby's head is just taking up a lot more space. So mama might have to do a lot more movement to really make space in her pelvis to let this baby drop down. Or baby might try to come into the pelvis in an asynclitic way if the head is not well flexed, because that might be their attempt to enter the pelvis effectively. So sometimes babies come in asynclitic, which means they bring one side of the skull into the pelvis first, and then the other side drops down. So an anterior asynclitic means that the anterior ear drops into the pelvis first, and then the posterior will drop in afterwards. Or a posterior asynclitic, where the back side of the head and ear drop into the pelvis, followed by the anterior side. And so baby kind of wiggles the head down into the pelvis. And that can be perfectly physiological and normal. We do get concerned if over time baby's head molds into an asynclitic position. So there's molding happening, which kind of fits baby's head into this shape, and then maybe even some caput, which would be kind of a blister like a large blister that happens in that space. And so baby's head really doesn't have the ability then to turn back into a synclitic position or to do the movements that need to happen to bring baby's head down and through. So those are some variations of normal that can occur. You also can sometimes get face presentations where baby is fully deflexed, or brow presentations where baby brings the forehead into the pelvis first, and those can both be pretty challenging. Face presentations can still be born vaginally sometimes, but a brow presentation is really, really extra challenging. So in situations where baby's head is coming into the pelvis in a funny way, or not fully well deflexed, or not fully flexed, then we might want to encourage baby to sort of draw back from the pelvis. So we might spend a little time in like an inverted pose, like forward leaning inversion or the knee chest position, just to draw baby away from the pelvis for a moment and give them a moment to sort of make adjustments to their head and neck and find a more effective way at getting into the pelvis. Sometimes something like that is all it takes to get baby adjusted in the way that they need to be so that they can make it down and through the pelvis to be born.